As my brother has related to me, in October 2003, a few days after our mother, Patricia MacColl, had died, he was writing the address that he was to give at her memorial service. As he was wading through 9 leather-bound photo albums, which our mother had put together after the Second World War, of her time spent as a WAAF officer, he came across a brown envelope with our mother's handwriting on it. Inside the envelope was the following. I think the climax was reached yesterday, when I managed to get in quite a few flying hours during a test flight that was being made. For one awful moment, I thought that the end had really come, when one engine caught fire and our landing gear crumpled up on us. Everyone was wonderfully calm, and somehow, in consequence, one couldn't help but be the same. And you know, it's a funny thing, but I honestly didn't mind a bit. I just felt that life had been great fun, that there was nothing that I regretted, and that was as good a way as any to end. And on talking to the others afterwards, I found that they had felt just the same. I'm glad that I had the experience now, simply because I feel that I know in a small way just how a pilot feels when he's going for a Burton. As it happened, we were too low to bail out. Instead, the pilot made a crash landing and we all fell out of the aircraft just as soon as we possibly could before it caught fire, whereupon crash tenders, ambulances and photographers rolled up at the speed of 90 miles per hour. Talk about Hollywood and drama at one's own back door, though one could hardly call it one's own back door, being well over 100 miles from base. We then proceeded to be driven back very slowly and surely, after making out all the crash reports, etc., eventually arriving back at 2:30 hours after an air raid and a thunderstorm. Yes, we surely had our ration of excitement yesterday, enough to last me for a little time, I think, though in fact, as it turned out, I wouldn't have missed it for the world of worlds. Then below was the following quote. We spend so much time above this world, in a world of cloud and stars, that we have a feeling of being in another world, and death just means going on to another station to continue our work. While she was alive, our mother had never regaled her 3 children about this experience. All we knew were small snippets of her wartime experiences, and it was only much later, after her death, that through these albums and diaries, we have come to appreciate how much the war, in many direct and indirect ways, affected her life. Although it was 8 years after the Second World War, when our mother and father first crossed paths, had it not been for a sad and fatal event that had taken place during and due to the Second World War, an event that will be outlined later, the two of them would never have had the good fortune to meet each other and hence share their futures together. In the 1920s and early 1930s, our mother, with her older brother and sister and widowed mother, continued to live in the house a few miles from Salisbury, where their late husband had died in a tragic accident. But by the latter half of the 1930s, they had moved to a village near Winchester. Our mother, Patricia Rickman, who came to be known as Trisha or Trish, was born in 1920. This is her, aged 3. At the age of 11, she was attending Godolphin School in Salisbury. She's in the back row, 4th from the left, aged 14. She was sporty, captaining both the tennis and cricket teams, but also rebellious. In her final week of school, having excelled in sewing classes, she stuffed her bed with pillows and attended a local dance, wearing the ball gown that she had so meticulously made in those sewing classes. Upon her return, she was caught climbing up a drainpipe and was consequently expelled. In the year and a half after leaving school and before the war commenced, our mother's life appears to have been both blissful and blessed. The following photos give an inkling of what her youthful freedom in the late 1930s consisted of. Henley Regatta, 1938. Invitations to tennis competitions. This is her outside the Three Salmons Hotel, Usk, where she was staying while playing in the aforementioned tennis competition. She had also joined an amateur theatre company based in Hampshire. This photo is of her playing Queen Calafra in a play titled King Argimenes and the Unknown Warrior. There were dance invitations and balls galore. And Tatler covered the Sprinters' Ball, Brockenhurst, New Forest, 1939. There was a steady boyfriend too. It would seem that she was leading a charmed life. But near the end of the album, her life is about to change. On this same page, there is a photo of her older brother, Jerry Rickman, a young officer in the 9th Battalion, Northumberland Fusiliers when war was declared. The Northumberland Fusiliers was the same regiment that his and our mother's father had been commissioned into in 1898, in which the latter had spent the following 3 years fighting the Boers in South Africa. Her father, at the time a second lieutenant, is in the middle row, second on the right. 40 years later, the 9th Northumberland Fusiliers was part of the British Expeditionary Force and proceeded to France in April 1940. 2 months later, Jerry, within 24 hours of his evacuation from Dunkirk, recounted to his sister how the withdrawal had taken place, stating that, at first, it was orderly enough, but then it was chaos, as all the trucks, guns, ammunition and stores that had been piled up around Dunkirk were set fire to by the retreating soldiers. Then, how, stranded on the beach for 9 days, there would be constant Stuka dive bombing, heavy artillery pounding from inland, and explosions of petrol dumps and ammunition stores which were being methodically annihilated. Later in the war, the 9th Northumberland Fusiliers was to fare much worse. In September 1939, our mother was working in the accounts section of the Air Raid Precautions Department for Winchester District Council. It was here that information was received from wardens and messengers who then managed the delivery of the relevant services needed to deal with each incident. Note, Harry Edward Ward on the top left. While she was working in accounts, a poem was circulating in the department. It featured Harry Edward Ward and our mother, who was referred to in the accounts section as Patsy. In the 5th verse, the poet in the accounts department wrote, "Miss Rickman's clear eyes sparkle with a vivid, happy glow. Oh, she's got personality and energy and go. Oh, all the boys love Patsy. She cheers them when they're bored, but the only one that's head over heels is Harry Edward Ward." In August 1940, our mother enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. This was nearly 18 months before conscription for women was introduced in December 1941. she was 19 years old. She told us later that the reason why she chose to join the WAAF was because she thought that it had the smartest uniforms. Her best school friend, Dee, had joined the Wrens on that same criteria. It was at RAF West Drayton, a WAAF new entrant depot, where she enlisted. Although our mother collated these photograph albums after the war, one can still discern the thrill, excitement, and pride that she must have experienced when she had first joined up. Initially, members of the WAAF were recruited to fill posts as clerks, kitchen orderlies, and drivers to release men for frontline duties. However, the occupations open to women recruits diversified as the war progressed. Women in the WAAF were involved in telephony, telegraphy, and the interception of codes and ciphers. Also, they undertook the interpretation of aerial photographs and provided weather reports. Further, many members of the WAAF worked in the radar control system as reporters and also worked as plotters. Their work was vital during the Battle of Britain and later in guiding night fighter aeroplanes against German bombers. By 1941, the WAAF had become part of the Armed Forces of the Crown, subject to the Air Force Act. This was greeted with pride and enthusiasm by its members. Shortly after enlisting, she was posted to RAF Middle Wallop, which was part of Fighter Command. This is a photo she took shortly after her arrival. Up until this point, she had been leading a relatively sheltered life, but she had one advantage over many others. Accommodation for WAAF personnel was a persistent problem throughout the war and was never fully addressed. Recruiting of WAAF personnel always outstripping the supply of accommodation, and given that women in those days were far less conditioned compared to men to community life and its attendant disciplines, many might have found the adjustments that would be needed to live in cramped, crowded and drab conditions with not much privacy irksome. But our mother, having attended a boarding school, would not have found the adjustment to her new life as challenging as many others. In October 1940, shortly after being posted to RAF Middle Wallop, she was sent to RAF Netheravon in Wiltshire. This is her learning the skills required to be a radio telephone operator. And here is Dot Taylor, a woman on the same course who features regularly in our mother's diaries. They quickly became close friends, going to the cinema and dances together. After finishing training, Dot and our mother returned to RAF Middle Wallop, where they both worked as radio telephone operators. Radio telephone operators tracked the signal from the aircraft when the pilots of the aircraft wanted to check their position. This signal was then transmitted to the control center, together with the readings from the operations room, which could then pinpoint the pilot's position. There would normally be 2 operators at each station who would be sitting in the control tower with a pair of radio telephones clamped over their ears and a telephone mouthpiece at their side. They would need an unflappable disposition, especially given that the control tower would be a prime target for the Luftwaffe. The role of a radio telephone operator had, prior to 1940, been a man's role. This was not due to any doubt of women's capabilities for these duties, but to the nature of the language passing through. Pilots, it was thought, would lack confidence in women and mistrust their ability to understand technical terms normally used. But this proved to be a misconception, and by December 1940, it was recommended that 50% of the total telephone radio operators should comprise women in fighter and bomber commands, increasing to 75% by 1943. During the Battle of Britain, 609 Squadron moved to RAF Middle Wallop as part of Fighter Command's efforts to defend the south coast of England west of London. The squadron remained in the south throughout the Battle of Britain and began taking offensive sweeps over France in February 1941. On the 21st of October 1940, the squadron became the first to achieve 100 confirmed enemy aircraft kills, which our mother duly noted. Here's a typed-out list in one of her albums of pilot officers in 609 Squadron. At the top of the list is Squadron Leader Mickey Robinson. When he arrived at Middle Wallop, he was already a flying ace. Within 3 days of Robinson having been posted to Middle Wallop, he shot down 2 Messerschmitt 110s. Between the 7th of May to the 24th of July 1941, he claimed 9 Messerschmitt 109s destroyed and another 8 damaged. Robinson was awarded the DSO on the 5th of August 1941 and the Belgian Croix de Guerre on the 22nd of August 1941. In 1989, our mother placed an obituary from the Times of Wing Commander Paul Ritchie, who had died that year. He was another of the many flying aces who were in 609 Squadron. On the 19th of May 1940, as a flying officer, Ritchie intercepted and destroyed 3 Henkel 111 medium bombers near Château-Thierry, but was wounded by the defensive armament of one or more of the bombers that he had targeted. He survived the subsequent crash landing of his Hurricane and was repatriated to the United Kingdom for medical treatment. During some of our mother's time at RAF Middle Wallop, he was the fighter controller of the station. In 1941, he wrote his memoirs, Fighter Pilot, the first wartime pilot to do so. 47 years later, memories of RAF Middle Wallop and Wing Commander Paul Ritchie must have flooded back as she read the obituary. There were a number of Poles in the squadron. J. Zurakowski is the 5th one at the bottom of the list. He had joined the Polish Air Force in 1937 and escaped to England after Poland had been defeated, taking part in the Battle of Britain. In 1945, after the war, he tested Britain's first jet fighter. In 1952, in Toronto, Canada, he became Avro Aircraft's Chief Development Pilot Officer, breaking the sound barrier in an Avro Arrow C-105. It was at this same RAF station that our mother told us of a night fighter pilot that she had known. He was the first in 604 Squadron to bring down an enemy plane at night. When the bomber squadron that this pilot was in take to their aircraft, the pilot's dog would accompany his master onto the runway and observe him take off. The dog would then wait and watch patiently for his master to come back and land. On the 6th of February 1941, Hunter and his radar operator took off from Middle Wallop in the dark for a delayed air test. Their Bow fighter went into a spin as it approached to land. Both men were killed. The dog waited expectantly on the runway for 1 week, day and night. The dog's presence there becoming a constant reminder to the comrades of Alistair Hunter of his loss, such that the dog had to be coaxed off the runway. In January 1942, Rory Chisholm was appointed controller of RAF Middle Wallop. He was another of 604 Squadron's flying aces. As a Beaufighter night fighter pilot between the 13th of March and the 9th of July 1941, he was credited with 7 aerial victories, 1 probable and 1 damaged. My brother owes his Christian name to this pilot, Rory. Number 93 Squadron was formed on the 7th of December 1940 at Middle Wallop, which had by this point become involved in experimental flying. Before the war, tactical papers suggested that fighter aircraft would face great danger attacking massed bomber formations, and it was argued that the crossfire of 20 or more bombers in close formation might inflict heavy losses on the interceptors. Therefore, it was considered important to devise a method to break up bomber formations to allow the fighters to pick off the bombers individually. One proposal was to lay a defensive aerial minefield. The resulting weapon, named the Long Aerial Mine, was developed. The Long Aerial Mine consisted of a 1-pound bomb attached to a parachute, below which hung a 2,000-foot length of piano wire ending in a second furled parachute. If an enemy aircraft snagged the wire, the shock wave would release the upper parachute and deploy the lower one, which would then drag the bomb down onto the aircraft. The plane which was used to carry these aerial minefields was the twin-engined Handley Page Harrow. To deploy these mines, these planes would climb up to 25,000 feet and release the aerial mines at short intervals in the path of enemy aircraft. It was 93 Squadron that was tasked with implementing this new weapon. One of the pilots who flew Harrows with 93 Squadron during the long aerial mine operations was Flight Lieutenant Dennis Haley Bell, 7th from the top. Much later, Flight Lieutenant Haley Bell described to a writer what it was like to fly these bombers. One flew alone in the Harrow, which meant that during the long climb to height and the subsequent wait for the enemy, one felt rather lonely. The clumsy Harrow was not an ideal machine to go to war in. It was very slow, and because there was no heating and the cockpit ceiling was often poor, very cold at high altitude. When the radar controller saw a likely-looking enemy bomber coming in my direction, he would direct me onto an intercept heading to one side and about 1,000 feet above the intended victim. At the critical moment, I would receive the order to turn sharp left or right so as to bring me across the path of the victim. Then I would start the Mickey Mouse, the clockwork unit which released the bombs. The long aerial mine program was not a success due to the difficulties of radar control. Of the 112 mine-laying sorties flown by 93 Squadron between the 11th of March and the 29th of July 1941, only Haley Bell was credited with a confirmed kill. It was at RAF Middle Wallop that our mother and Dennis Haley Bell became lovers. Having joined the Royal Air Force in 1937, he was, by 1941, a distinguished pilot, having been awarded the DFC. Dennis Haley Bell, known to his comrades as Tinker Bell, features a lot in our mother's photograph albums. This letter, although in our mother's handwriting, is an extract from a letter that Dennis Haley Bell had written to her. He wrote, "I should so long to take you up with me into the wonderful, cold, clean air, where those wonderful, great white clouds look like pillows, where you feel lord of everything, and where the cares and stupid squabbles down below seem so very unimportant, with the sun glinting on the propellers which 2,000 horses are pulling through the air at 300 miles per hour, ruled only by a touch on the controls." I suppose that sounds stupid to you, but to me, it is my life. Near the end of the extract, it reads, "All I ever want to do is to fly and fly, and if it is written so, I want to end my days up there, where it is one plane against another, and a good, clean end." In August 1942, Dennis Haley Bell and our mother stayed in the Bull Hotel in Hoddesdon, Hertfordshire. But by December 1942, the idyll was over. These are two cuttings of newspaper announcements which our mother after the war had placed in a photograph album. The top cutting of Dennis Haley Bell's engagement to Elizabeth King, and the bottom one of their marriage. Alongside these, there is a photo of the married couple. Below this photo, our mother has extracted a magazine cutting which she must at the time have deemed as appropriate. It reads, "For all his airs and independence, he wasn't much more than a baby himself." After the war, Dennis Haley Bell continued his distinguished flying career, flying Dakota transports for BOAC on the Indian and South African routes, and being a test pilot for the VC-10 in the early 1960s. It was during this time that my brother met him. It was, he later told me, a weekday in 1962. He was 6 years old. The doorbell rang. Excitedly, he approached the door and opened it. A stranger stood there, staring at him. Then he asked my brother Rory if his mother was in. The stranger told my brother that his name was Dennis, but that his mother would know him as Tinker. My brother went to the garden and told our mother that there was a man called Tinker at the front door. She was in utter disbelief. He followed her to the door, whereupon, gathering her wits, she beckoned Tinker in and led him into the drawing room, closing the door behind them. Later, we came to understand that during that discussion, Dennis Haley Bell had asked our mother to abandon her marriage, pack her bags, and immediately go off with him for good. That was why he had chosen a weekday to knock on the door. He was counting on our father being at work. Evidently, he was still in love with her. It was as though nothing could ever live up to the intensity of the wartime affair that he had had with her when their paths had first crossed 20 years before at RAF Middle Wallop, and he'd not only never forgotten it, but wanted, whatever the cost, to recapture those heady days. Dennis Haley Bell died in 1995, a year after his wife Elizabeth had died. In December 1942, our mother placed in the same album the following. As I look over the past 12 months, I know that, in spite of the long separations and the horrors of war, it has been the most glorious, happy year of my life. our mother's love affair with Dennis Haley Bell had continued after she had left RAF Middle Wallop and had been posted to 2 other RAF stations. On the 2nd of August 1941, now at RAF Gosport, she received a commission as an Assistant Section Officer. RAF Gosport was principally a Royal Navy airfield where Royal Navy fighters were stationed in defence of Southampton and Portsmouth. 2 days later, she was attending a course in codes and ciphers at a WAAF officers training school at Loughborough Technical College. Our mother is one to the left in the middle row. At the top of the photo, she has written August 1942, but the dates of the course reveal that it took place a year earlier. A week later, she returned to Gosport. It was here, in February 1942, that she found out that her brother, Jerry Rickman, who was by now a captain in the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, had gone missing that same month at the Battle of Singapore. She knew nothing more. In June 1942, our mother was posted to RAF Marston Moor, Yorkshire. The latter was the centre of heavy bombing training within Bomber Command's 4 Group. It trained crews for Halifaxes, which were to play a major role in 4 Group until the end of the war. The early versions of the Halifax, the Mark I and Mark II, were not pilot-friendly. And given that these bombers had already been used extensively before they arrived at Marston Moor, these factors led to the loss of 70 aircraft, mostly in training accidents. Here, our mother worked in codes and ciphers. During our mother's time at Marston Moor, Wing Commander Leonard Cheshire was appointed as group captain of this station. By this juncture, he had undertaken 50 bombing sorties with 35 Squadron. As a group captain, he was the youngest person to hold this rank. His posting to Marston Moor was seen by the echelons of the RAF as a means of preserving one of their most valuable assets. Cheshire was not happy with this appointment and spent the 5 months that he was at Marston Moor pestering his superiors to allow him to return to operational duty. This he succeeded in doing and was awarded the Victoria Cross in July 1944 upon the completion of his 4th tour of duty. The historian Max Hastings was later to write of him, "Cheshire was a legend in Bomber Command, a remarkable man with an almost mystical air about him, as if he somehow inhabited a different planet from those about him, but without affectation or pretension." 3 years later, Cheshire would participate in the Nagasaki atomic bomb detonation as an observer in the drop plane, the Big Stink. After the war, because of his experiences in it, Cheshire dedicated his life to peace and justice, defining it as not just the absence of war or armed confrontation. Peace is the effect or consequence of justice. We move towards peace proportionately as we succeed in removing injustice, particularly the injustice of mass starvation and deprivation. He went on to found the Cheshire Homes supporting people with disabilities across the world to live, learn, and work as independently as they choose, whatever their ability. More than 300 homes worldwide were brought into being. His wife, Sue Ryder, founded what is now known as Sue Ryder Care. Here is our mother and friends at Marston Moor. Clark Gable was stationed at Marston Moor that year. Later, Gable flew 5 combat missions, including one to Germany, as an observer gunner in B-17 Flying Fortresses, earning the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross for his efforts. During one of the missions, Gable's aircraft was damaged by flak and attacked by fighters, which knocked out one of the engines and shot up the stabilizer. In the raid on Germany, 1 crewman was killed and 2 others were wounded, and flak went through Gable's boot and narrowly missed his head. Hitler favoured Gable above all other actors. During World War II, he offered a sizable reward to anyone who could capture and bring Gable to him unscathed. On the 15th of February 1943, she wrote the following: "No letters, except a returned one that I wrote to Jerry Boy some little while ago, which was rather depressing. However, I'm still convinced that he's alive somewhere. Somehow, I refuse to believe otherwise." I sat straight down and wrote him off another. In March 1943, our mother was posted to a United States Air Force station at RAF Bury St Edmunds, formerly RAF Rougham. By this point, she had been promoted to section officer. This was an American Bomber Command station where the 322nd Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force was based. The mighty 8th Air Force, as it came to be known, was one of the first Bomber Command units to attempt daylight bombing of German targets. During World War II, under the leadership of such generals as Ira Eaker and Jimmy Doolittle, the 8th Air Force formed the greatest air armada in history. By mid-1944, the unit had a total strength of more than 200,000 people. And it could send more than 2,000 4-engine bombers and 1,000 fighters on a single mission against enemy targets in Europe. It was here that she worked as an intelligence officer, conducting briefing and debriefing of bomber crews on their way out and upon their return from bombing missions. During the first 2 years of the war, it was thought, from a psychological point of view, that it would be inadvisable for women to brief or interrogate air crews, but there again, the conception was misplaced. On the 13th of May 1943, 322nd Bomb Group, based at RAF Bury St Edmunds, and the first group to fly B-26 Marauders in the UK, was tasked with a low-level strike mission to destroy a power station in the Netherlands. The 11 B-26 that took off flew very low in an attempt to foil the enemy's radar. 9 of the 11 that made it to the Dutch coastline were badly damaged, one of the planes crashing upon return. A few days later, the group was informed that owing to most of the bombs having missed the target, the group would have to return again. 4 days later, of the 11 that went out, 1 aborted within 30 miles of the Dutch coast, and in among the heavy flak, 2 collided and brought down another due to the ensuing explosion. Another was brought down by Messerschmitt 109s, and 4 that were badly damaged crashed into the sea. Out of the 11, only 1 B-26 returned unscathed, with 60 aircrew being lost to anti-aircraft flak and interception of German fighters. Our mother's memory, 3 or so years later, of the losses incurred is out by 1 plane, but even so, she would have been deeply affected by this event, probably being close to some of the aircrew that did not come back. In the aftermath of this shocking loss, the group trained for medium-altitude operations for several weeks, resuming combat missions on the 17th of July, 1943. Group morale was not improved when, on the 29th of May, a B-26 crashed onto the airfield, killing the crew and damaging a hangar. After the devastating debacle of the May Strike missions, the 322nd Group moved to Andrews Field, Essex, and the 94th Bomb Group replaced them at RAF Bury St Edmunds. It was around this time that she came across a newspaper article about what had happened to her brother's battalion 15 months beforehand. She found out that survivors of the Battle of Singapore had been taken into captivity, but she still had no idea whether her brother was one of the survivors. In February 1942, the Free French ship, the Felix Roussel, had been transporting the 9th Battalion Royal Northumberland Fusiliers on the final stage of their journey to Singapore along the Banker Straits, when it and the rest of the convoy were attacked by 27 Japanese planes. A party of Fusiliers manned the AA guns and brought down 3 of the airplanes attacking the ship. Upon the Felix Roussel's arrival at the port of Singapore, crowds of women and children who were swarming on the quayside had pleaded to be taken on board. The captain took 1,200 of them and left the smoking harbour while the Fusiliers disembarked and went on a doomed mission to meet the enemy. This is a letter received by our mother from another WAAF officer, Pam Finch, who had also been stationed at RAF Marston and who, likewise, became a very close lifelong friend. Pam was writing to our mother in 1981 about her wartime memories. Part of it reads, "I'm not a bit brave, just a nostalgic fool who reckons the best time of her life was when she was given an intelligence commission in the WAAF and posted to Linton to debrief crews returning to Britain from Hunland. I used to watch the lads take off in the evening and be up at dawn or whenever to welcome them home with a tot of rum in their coffee. There are only about 2 other WAAF officers in 4 Group, as far as I know, with a similar job. Most of my boyfriends, and due to the scarcity of women, I had quite a few, went missing and were either wounded or killed or ended up at the Starlags. One day, I'm going to write a book about it." At her funeral in 1988, many top-ranking intelligence officials were in attendance. Apparently, after the war, she had been employed by MI6 as an intelligence officer. She was in Tehran when the US, along with the UK, played a major role in the successful coup against the democratically elected Prime Minister. Also, she was in Cuba in 1959 and 1960, involved in covert operations against Castro and his rebels. But in her company, you would never have guessed any of this. She was a demure lady, always with a smile on her face, who, despite all the boyfriends that she had in the war, had never married. A WAAF officer's life was often intense. Unlike any of the other women's auxiliary military forces, they would be working cheek by jowl with their male comrades, including planning bombing operations, providing maps and information on bombing targets, and debriefing crews within minutes of these traumatized and exhausted crews returning from bombing operations. The last thing that these crews would want to discuss was what they had just been through. But a debriefer's duty was to extract crucial information about bomb damage assessment and whether it would be necessary to send aircrew back again to the intended targets. By continuing to work, despite the loss of friends and loved ones, this role required great strength of character if these WAAF officers were to diligently do their duty. Then, once this information had been gathered, the aircrew would be sitting with the WAAF officers at dinner with some of the places not taken up. But when it came to relaxing, the aircrew would have undoubtedly enjoyed the company of the very few women who were stationed at bomber command stations. And these US aircrew had a sureness and swagger about them, especially given that their salaries were considerably larger than the British equivalent. The Americans brought Coca-Cola, Lucky Strike cigarettes, candy, chewing gum, nylon stockings, R&B, blues and jazz, jukeboxes, pinball machines, and the exuberant dance, the jitterbug. They wore smarter uniforms and were paid much more than their British counterparts. Music historian Colin Larkin has stated, "They never did anything by halves." There was often resentment about them due to the way they threw their money about indiscriminately. British women who chased after US GIs were known resentfully by some as moneybags. The successes of Bomber Command were purchased at terrible cost. Of every 100 airmen who joined Bomber Command, 45 were killed, 6 were seriously wounded, 8 became prisoners of war, and only 41 escaped unscathed, at least physically. Of those who were flying at the beginning of the war, only 10% survived. Only the Nazi U-boat force suffered a higher casualty rate. This is an obituary of General Ira Eaker, who died in 1987. In 1942, he was commander of the 8th Air Force and was one of the key architects of daylight precision bombing. The British considered daylight bombing too risky and wanted the Americans to join them in night raids that would target wide areas, but Eaker persuaded Churchill that both the American and British approaches would complement each other. Eaker led the first daylight raid, which was on marshalling yards at Rouen. 43 years after our mother had been a WAAF officer deployed with the 8th Air Force, she had cut out this obituary and placed it in one of her war albums. Another fading memory brought back to the fore. This is a photo of General Eaker taken by our mother. Then there are these of her time stationed at USA Air Force Rougham. Here's a wedding between a WAAF officer and a US airman. Salty, a pilot in the US 8th Air Force, features regularly. Then one day, the bomber squadron that Salty was flying in returned to RAF Bury St Edmunds after a bombing mission to a ball bearing factory at Schweinfurt, Germany. Salty's flying fortress failed to return. The RAF Chief of Air Staff, Charles Portal, writing to General Eaker after the Schweinfurt raid, stated, "I believe the attack on Schweinfurt will be many times its cost. In fact, it may well go down to history as one of the decisive air actions of the war and may prove to have saved countless lives by depriving the enemy of a great part of his means of resistance. In offering you my most sincere congratulations, may I say that the 8th Air Force has earned for itself the last week a reputation which the Royal Air Force will never forget." In the summer of 1943, our mother was posted to RAF Brayton in Yorkshire, which was home to RAF 78 Squadron, which was equipped with Handley Page Halifax bombers. For 3 months, she worked as a debriefer. 78 Squadron participated in all the major bombing raids in France and Germany that ensued during the time that our mother was based at this station and took many casualties in this period. On August 1st, 1943, he was posted to Elvedon Hall, Suffolk, where the US 3rd Air Division, 8th Air Force was headquartered. The Paradise Lost and the Paradise Regained refer to her delight that she was back working with the Americans. This is a roster of officers of the US 3rd Air Division. She's in the 4th row from the bottom, second on the right. Out of 142 officers in this division, she was one of only 5 women officers. And here is a photo of Curtis LeMay, commander of this bomber division, signed by him to our mother. Robert McNamara, the future Secretary of State in John Kennedy's and Lyndon Johnson's administration, was to say of Curtis LeMay, who is sitting on the right, "He was the finest combat commander of any service I came across in war. But he was extraordinarily belligerent, many thought brutal. He got the report, he issued an order, he said, 'I will be in the lead plane on every mission. Any plane that takes off will go over the target or the crew will be court-martialed.' The abort rate dropped overnight. Now that's the kind of commander he was." As Chief of Staff of the USA Air Force in the 1960s, Curtis LeMay was alleged to have stated regarding the People's Army of Vietnam, "They've got to draw in their horns and stop their aggression, or we are going to bomb them back into the Stone Age, and we would shove them back into the Stone Age with air power or naval power, not with ground forces." Frank Kaplan, a highly regarded American journalist and author, referring to Stanley Kubrick's 1964 film Dr. Strangelove about nuclear war plans, a film which is widely heralded as one of the greatest satires in American political or movie history, stated, "It was no secret. it would have been obvious to many viewers in 1964 that General Ripper looked a lot like Curtis LeMay, the cigar-chomping, gruff-talking general. This is our mother conversing with General Curtis LeMay's ADC at RAF Elvedon Hall. It was here that she wrote a poem inspired by her 3-month attachment with 78th Squadron at RAF Brayton. A thought of late has occurred to me that however old I live to be, I'll always remember and thank a kind fate for that memorable summer with 78. A Halifax squadron with 7 in crew, the best crowd of people that ever I knew, Gordon and Bunny, Brian and Brad, Jackie and Mike, and the fun we had. Gramophone records and rabbits and swing, sergeants' mess parties and songs to sing. As from the control tower we'd watch them away, off down the runway, then climbing high like giant birds in the darkening sky. Those who took off didn't always come back. Brian and Bunny, Norman and Jack, Johnny and Gordon, friends old and new, and the pain of their going would gnaw one through, but their spirit of courage, so hard to tell, made a strange happiness out of the hell. At the start of the war, the commissioning of WAAF officers had, due to the force's rapid expansion, been done hastily and at times haphazardly, resulting in some cases in the appointment of unsuitable and immature officers. Thus, by February 1942, it was deemed necessary that an officers' cadet unit training course should be established and run at the Bellsfield Hotel, Windermere, which had been requisitioned. Those, like our mother, who had been commissioned before the officers' training unit course had been established, were now required to take a 2-week refresher course, failure of which would result in losing one's commission. The course was strenuous, beginning at 8:30 a.m. and continuing until 6:30 p.m. 6 days per week. On the 4th of December 1943, she was posted to RAF Leighton Buzzard. During the Second World War, the station was a major base for secret communication traffic. Many tunnels filled with what was state-of-the-art equipment were used to protect the equipment. It handled practically the whole of the national landline teleprinter communications and a large part of the private speech telephone system, together with the wireless transmission and reception of all RAF international communications. In 1942, it was described as the largest telephone exchange in the world. Here, she worked in codes and ciphers, which was the largest WAAF officer branch. Code and cipher work was demanding, especially given the constantly changing methods and regulations which governed the work, which necessitated keeping one's wits about one. This branch of the WAAF would also be the first one to go overseas, as our mother was to do. On the 6th of December, she had received this response to a letter that she had evidently written to a wing officer, requesting that she be put on the list to serve a further term with the United States Air Force. On the back of the wing officer's reply, she has written in a tongue-in-cheek manner, a request for a further term of punishment. 4 months after arriving at Leighton Buzzard, she received the following from the Japanese Imperial Army. This was the first indication that her brother was still alive after having gone missing at the Battle of Singapore nearly 2 years before. 2 months later, our mother's mother, Muriel, was taken seriously ill. She was 51. She had developed a septic tooth and needed penicillin. This new wonder drug, discovered and developed by Alexander Fleming, could not yet be produced in synthetic form, so was in short supply and was hence rationed for use solely for Allied forces. When Muriel's septic tooth had developed into septicemia, our mother, desperate for help, even telephoned Alexander Fleming in a forlorn bid to obtain some. Muriel died on the 27th of July, 1944, never knowing whether Jerry, her son, would make it back alive from the Japanese POW camp in Thailand that he was interned in. Shortly after our mother's death, she volunteered for a posting to Italy. An overseas posting for WAAF officers was quite rare. The posting of WAAF personnel overseas was only agreed when the shortage of manpower in certain trades or branches made it essential. Only 4.5% of the total number of women who served in the WAAF served overseas, all of them volunteers. On the 30th of January 1944, she arrived at Greenock and embarked upon the SS Scythia. In her diary, she writes, 23rd of January, living conditions very tough, 6 in cabin for 1. 24th of January, I've learnt more card games on the floor of the lounge than ever I knew in my life. Still in port, watching aircraft carriers and submarines, etc. Lining up in the convoy. I'm still being entertained solely by the Navy, and like it, what's more. There's nothing like the senior service to my mind. 28th of January, danced on deck in the afternoon, and in the evening attended a ship's concert and dance. The convoy sailed. Whoopee! 30th of January, still an angry sea, but am surviving. Convoy appears to be 4 deep and 5 columns wide, with 3 to 4 protecting destroyers. Have left Ireland behind now. 31st of January. We are leading the convoy. Weather's still angry, but feel fine. More boat drill and the guns practiced firing. Just love this life. I've never felt so well before. Upon arriving in Italy, she was stationed at Caserta Palace, where the Mediterranean Allied Air Force headquarters was based, where she continued to work in codes and ciphers. Caserta Palace was a former royal residence constructed by the House of Bourbon as their main residence as kings of Naples. It was the largest palace erected in Europe during the 18th century. On the 2nd of May 1945, our mother obtained 3 days' leave. She went to Rome. It was on this day that Italy surrendered. Poignantly, she cut out a newspaper article concerning a visit to Rome by Sir Alexander Fleming. On the 14th of July 1945, she was instructed to travel to Foggia to be detached to 336 Wing. It was here, in southern Italy, that she had a passionate affair with a pilot in the South African Air Force Squadron. He was known by our mother as Ling. The squadron was under the operational command of the Royal Navy Air Division and flew from HMS Trumpeter, an aircraft carrier which at the time was operating in the Adriatic Sea near southern Italy. This is Ling in a Supermarine Spitfire on board the flight deck of HMS Trumpeter. They were together for 2 months until our mother was posted elsewhere. At some point during those 2 months, Ling told our mother that he was married, but was now planning, upon his eventual return to South Africa, to divorce his wife, who suffered from depression. His intention, which he made apparent to our mother, was to marry her and take her to go and live in South Africa. So, with the war now over and demobilization in sight, our mother arranged for someone in the UK to sell all the heirlooms that she had inherited from her mother for cash, as transporting non-essential items to South Africa was not possible, given that transport ships were still only carrying essential goods. During our mother's time in Foggia, she was granted 7 days leave. She went to Venice and stayed at a YWCA. At the end of the album, in which our mother described her Italian posting, she has placed this image. It is of the battalion that her dead father had commanded in the First World War. It is possible that she did this because she knew that she was about to be posted to Egypt, where her father's battalion had spent 6 months defending the Suez Canal from a possible attack by Turkish troops before the battalion went to meet their fate on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Here are some photos of her time based in Foggia. On the 9th of September 1944, our mother was dispatched to Cairo, where she would be based at RAF Al-Maza, formerly a civilian aerodrome, which had now been taken over by the RAF. She went there, probably full of joy and excitement, thinking that soon she would be demobilized and would be living a life of blissful marriage with Ling on the southern tip of the same continent. Upon arrival, she was temporarily based at the Heliopolis Palace Hotel, Cairo, which was a transit hotel for the RAF. On the 23rd of September 1944, she wrote in her diary, "Have left the Heliopolis and have come down to a tent of all damn things in 22 Personal Transit Centre, an absolutely grim place on the outskirts of the desert at RAF Al-Maza. Her place of work was at Telecommunications Middle East, which was built in the desert just beyond RAF Al-Maza, and was to accommodate the signals and cipher sections of HQ RAF Middle East to receive and dispatch all traffic for the Middle East HQ, and to act as a link in the worldwide network of wireless communications. The conditions for the employment of women were far from satisfactory. The wireless transmission station itself was underground and fitted with air conditioning equipment that was, for the most part, out of order. Hence, it was stuffy and appallingly hot. The noise of the machines was deafening, and after 6 hours of it, officers emerged mentally and physically depleted. Several photos reveal her time spent in and around RAF Al-Maza. At the end of September 1945, our mother heard that a troop carrier, the SS Corfu, would be arriving at Adabaya docks, which was at the southern end of the Suez Canal, 90 miles from Cairo. The ship was carrying about 10,000 prisoners of war released from Japanese camps in Thailand and Burma. On the 28th of September, on the off chance that her brother Jerry might be on this ship, she obtained leave to travel that night with an officer to Adabaya docks, where the SS Corfu was due to dock the next day. The journey was not without peril. The vehicle that she was in suffered a broken back axle, and so the officer driving her left her in the vehicle to go and help. Sometime during the night, nomads could be heard and then seen approaching the vehicle on camels. Our mother slunk down as far as she could underneath the passenger dashboard. Arriving at the vehicle, the nomads peered into the seemingly abandoned and dark car and then went on their way. The 90-mile journey took 24 hours to accomplish. Upon arrival at Adabaya on the 29th of September, this is what she saw. The SS Corfu had already docked. Trying to spot her brother seemed a hopeless task. But this she did. She was shocked by his physical condition. He, on the other hand, was desperate to hear news about the rest of his family. As our mother related to my brother, she was at first hesitant to inform her brother that his mother had died 15 months before, given that for 3.5 years he must have been hoping that someday he would be free from his captivity and would see her again. But then our mother also knew that, despite his mental and physical fragility, she had no choice but to tell him. She had about 30 minutes with him on the dockside. Given that the two of them had not seen or been in contact with each other for over 3.5 years, our mother must have had much to tell her brother in that half hour. He, less so. Not because he hadn't got things to talk about. He just didn't want to go there. He would remain like that for the rest of his life. This is a photo of the SS Corfu leaving Adabaya docks to begin the final leg of its journey to Southampton. Auld Lang Syne was sung as the ship left the dock. Of those in the 11th Battalion Northumberland Fusiliers who had fought at the Battle of Singapore in 1942 who did not return home, 15 were killed in action, 7 died of wounds received in action, 129 died in captivity, and 22 were lost at sea when the Rakuyo Maru, which was transporting British, Australian and American troops from the Thailand-Burma Railway to Japan, was torpedoed and sunk on the 12th of September 1944. By far, the most lost their lives through dysentery and cholera due to the unsanitary conditions in the camps, while many died of malnutrition and others from tropical diseases such as beriberi and malaria. Those that returned were shadows of their former selves and did not return to the rapturous welcome that the soldiers returning from other theatres of war had received. Many continued to suffer ill health throughout their lives. They rarely talked about their experiences, their hardships, and the brutality that they suffered at the hands of their Japanese captors. On the 30th of September 1945, our mother wrote in her diary, feel quite a different person now that I know Jerry's safe at last. It's almost too wonderful to believe. To all intents and purposes, the Uncle Jerry that we knew was always amusing and jovial, but to our mother, his former self was just a memory. On the 13th of October, she wrote in her diary, "Who said that the 13th was unlucky? Had my first letter from Ling today, and know that he's missing me now as much as I am him. Feel I can go on living now." The above letter was sent by the now demobilized Ling from South Africa. Our mother's hopes were still high. But at some point in mid-November, she received another letter from Ling informing her that their relationship and future marriage was now off. His wife, upon hearing that he was intending to divorce her, had threatened suicide. It was this that stopped Ling in his tracks. On the 15th of November, our mother wrote, "Life is completely pointless without Ling." Although she had other relationships after the war, none was to compare with the one that she had had with Ling. Thus, she did not find a suitable partner until 8 years after the war had ended, when she married at the relatively late age of 33. In February 1946, our mother was informed that the officers in her Code and Cipher Corps were to be released. This is a telegram informing her brother and sister that she would be on her way home to Appleshaw near Winchester. 5 years and 6 months after enlisting in the WAAF, she returned home. And here is a welcome home greeting from our mother's local parish council. After leaving the WAAF, she had various jobs. She did some modelling. And she also had a job in the Conservation Department of the National Gallery. This is her on her lunch break. It was here, one day, that she was offered a contract by a visiting Hollywood producer, which she duly turned down, as she was informed it would be duly stated in the contract that she was forbidden to marry during the 7 years that she would be tied to it. But the job that she most enjoyed was not modelling for BEA, but becoming a BEA air hostess. I'm reminded of the account our mother wrote about the crash landing that she experienced, which I mentioned at the beginning. "Yes, we surely had our ration of excitement yesterday, enough to last me for a little time, I think, though in fact, as it turned out, I wouldn't have missed it for the world of worlds. We spend so much time above this world, in a world of cloud and stars, that we have a feeling of being in another world, and death just means going on to another station to continue our work." Exactly 50 years before she went on to that other station to continue her work, she met our father. The year was 1953. I mentioned near the beginning that this meeting was due to a sad and fatal event that had taken place during the war, which was the death of Muriel, our mother's mother. A BEA air hostess friend of our mother's, wishing to go home for Christmas to see her family, asked her if she would swap shifts. Working at Christmas was not such a sacrifice for our mother, as her brother was now married with a young family, and her sister was working over Christmas as a sister at St Thomas's Hospital in London. If her mother had been alive, then she might have thought otherwise, but as she mentioned, she had died due to a wartime exigency. In short, our mother, due to the war, had no family to spend Christmas with, so the latter, having no special importance for her, she duly obliged her friend and took on her Christmas shift. It was on this shift that she met our father up above the clouds on a plane. 5 months later, they married.